Hello relatives, Wes here with MIFC. I want to show you today we're going to sprout some corn. Here is painted mountain corn that many of you have or that you received in your bundles, and many of you also received the Bear Island flint corn. The painted mountain corn was bred by an individual in Big Timber, Montana over the course of many decades, breeding dozens of ancestral and non-ancestral varieties to get a corn that was very nutritious and also had some frost tolerance. So we're here on May 8th and we're gonna put that to test and see how early we can get this planted. That's just part of the story of this corn. All these seeds that are in our bundles are, have their own stories attached to them. And even with something like this painted mountain that has, maybe 70 or 80 different corns that went into, this one. And so how are we going to know the story of all those corns, right? And that's a really hard task. I mean, we could say the same thing for any of our crops that are really indigenous to Turtle Island, right? Our tomatoes, our peppers, our squashes. And so we're going to try to share as many of those stories that we know of, and we're not going to be able to, always talk about the whole story, but, if we know a piece of that story, then it changes our relationship with these seeds when we know of all the hands and the thousands of plant generations and all the hundreds of aunties and grandmas who have allowed, been faithful stewards of this seed to allow for, for us to have a bit of it here now in our gardens. And so that's a little bit about this painted mountain, this Bear Island flint corn that many of you have. Maybe we'll make another video on that. If you have that quite doesn't have the same frost tolerance as the painted mountain corn, and so this video is mainly for the painted mountain recipients here on May 8th. And if you're only your growing environment, and so if you're out of the danger of a frost, then by all means, like, maybe it's time to get that Bear Island flint in the corn, or get that Bear Island flint in the ground. But here we are, we have painted mountain, and so something that we struggle with here in the Northern Plains is a really short growing season, right? And so how do we grow our corn here when we have that short growing season, and especially in the spring where we're all itching to get our seeds in the ground? But corn goes through this process in the first 24 hours when you put that corn in the ground, called imbibition, where it soaks up a lot of water. But if the soil temperatures are too cold or too cool, like below 55 degrees, that can really be detrimental to the seed, to the point that it may not even germinate. And so one of the things we can do to kind of get around that is we can soak our corn and have that process happen indoors in a warmer environment before we plant it outside. And so that's what we've done here. I've had this corn soaking in water for about 12 to 18 hours. You don't want to let it sit more than 24 hours because then you might deprive it of oxygen. So I've let that soaked here, and if I were to pull out one of these kernels, you can maybe see if this is a little more plump than some of these dry kernels here. But what I like to do is I like to take a paper towel here, and I've kind of made it into accordion style. And you could just throw a bunch of seeds on a paper towel and wet it. But what I found is that seed, if it's all kind of rolled up in one big ball, like those kernels that are on the outer side of that ball that are making contact with the paper towel, are going to absorb more water and less water, and might dry out sooner than some of the ones inside. And so I like doing this method where I can make sure that everything's getting a similar amount of water. So I put some in each little fold, and many of you might have less seed, and that's okay. You just do it in a way that makes sure that seed is gonna be able to stay nice and wet. All right, there's all my corn. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold this up just gently like this. And most of that corn is going to be in the middle, and you'll have these little tails that you can kind of hold on to. And I'll show you what we do next. Okay, so here we are. I've done actually 3 of these accordion style paper towel roll-ups, and I've gently folded them up and put them inside this Ziploc bag. And now I'm just gonna make sure that, using a spray bottle, you could maybe gently dunk, after you get your seeds rolled up, gently dunk them in water and without that paper towel tearing. And then you're gonna wanna put them in a Ziploc bag, and you just wanna make sure that these paper towels get really, really, really wet and stay, or fairly moist. We don't want them to dry out. And so after we do this, what I would do is I would then take this and I'm going to place this in a warm plate in a warm spot in my house. You can put it in direct sun, but just be careful with that, that you don't get some funky stuff growing in there. But in theory, this should only be a couple days. And so, above the fridge or, in the upper part of your house where it's going to be nice and warm, that's an ideal place. And so what we're going to do is we're going to let this sit here, and we're going to check on this probably in 2 days and just make sure that paper towel is dry. Okay, so here we are. You can see a lot of this corn sprouted, and that was only about 2.5 days sitting inside that Ziploc bag. I was trying to plant this yesterday, but had some issues with the ground being too wet. And so ideally, the stage we want to plant this at is when that first little, really this is going to be the root, is about, a 1/4 inch long. And that's exactly that. You want to time it so that your weather and your soil is ready to go when that is at that stage. And if we wait a little longer, if we don't time it right and it gets to be that long, we can still plant this, but that becomes a lot more fragile and a lot more easily to break off. And if we do that, that seed is done. That will not regrow. And so you can see many of these are a little too long. And so we're going to go ahead and be very, very careful and plant these today because we need to get this in the ground. But ideally, as when you're doing this at home with your corn, you want to try to time it so that we're going to plant it at that stage right there instead of that stage right there. It's just going to make your success a lot more probable because it's super easy to break those off. But so once we have this here, we're going to want to plant it about 1 inch to 2 inches deep. So for me, that's about in between my first and second knuckle. And so I'm going to dig out a spot here. I'm going to put that in there, ideally root down, and then cover that up. And there's different ways to doing this. Some of you might be growing in mounds, and that's its own planting methodology, but it'd be the similar depth, similar stage that you'd want to plant it in. We can do it. I'll just show you. We could do one here. We're going to do this one another 12 inches of, further down the row, but it just is a lot more delicate and easy to break off as we set that down in there. Another way to do this, I'll show you over here, is to do a furrow like this. And so you can see that's what I've done here. Instead of trying to punch each one down into the soil individually, I've just made a long furrow here. And so I made that the depth I want, around 2 inches, 1.5 inches. And then I'm going through and dropping that seed down in there, and we'll go through and cover this all up. And that just, in my mind, makes it a little easier, a little more less likely to break those little roots off. And so you can see I've done another one here, and I'm going to go back down and cover that up. This is some old cover crop that I just weeded out this morning. And so yeah, we're pretty early here planting this Painted Mountain, and we're going to see how well it does here. The 10-day forecast is a little on the cooler side with highs in the 60s and lows in the 40s, so we're well above freezing but still on the cooler side. So we're going to see how well this Painted Mountain does here in those conditions. So check back for more here in a couple days, or we'll see how well it's coming up.